Hi, this is Jody from Poppywinkle, and this week I'm going to talk about how I get started. It's always hard for me to start a new project, and I've heard a lot of people say the same thing. Writers talk about the blank page, and I think all creative endeavors can be difficult to start. So I have a little process. Hopefully it'll be good for everybody to hear some of my ideas, but it's definitely good for beginners who are just nervous about starting their first journal. I'm not going to call it a junk journal because I didn't use a whole lot of junk in it. I'm just going to call it a handmade journal. So this is how I start. And the first thing you want to do is gather your supplies. I am using digital printables, digital papers that I just printed on my computer, and mostly. And when they come out, they always have a white line around them. I don't know of any computer or any printer that doesn't do that. I think there are some, but none I've ever encountered. So first you need to think about, do you want to get rid of that white line? I always do. And I just rip the edges off. So I just take a ruler and just rip down whatever, a quarter inch or whatever it takes. Sometimes you have to add a little extra width because you can't pull it. you have to give yourself enough room to pull it off. And then I usually ink the edges too, although I didn't on this one. So I just rip around. I like the way that looks. You could certainly cut it. You could cut it flush. Or you could even leave it. You could ink around the edges and to hide it, or just leave it white, however you like to do it. But I always print on two sides because I don't like white showing, and I usually print two different things because when you fold it in half, you would have, if this is in the middle, you'd have four of the same thing. If this was the same as this, it would be page one, page two. They would be all the same. So I like the different pages on each side. So then after I print on plain paper, I often will stick it in water. People coffee dye them also, and that tends to dull my colors, but I do like the crinkly that it gives it. And so I like to just stick mine in water and then let them dry. Now what it does do is it bleeds through. See, this is the image, but you also see it on this side. But for this particular journal, it's a Victorian Tea Party journal. For this particular one, I kind of like that old see-through look. I wouldn't do that always, but for this one, I like that. So just be aware that if you make it wet, your printer ink might come through. I also like to print on other things other than paper. This is vellum. I would not use this as a whole page because when you write on it, it doesn't dry right away, and inevitably I smear that. I don't like that. I'm not good at that. So this you only have to print on one side because you see it through. But I would use this for belly bands, or take a half of it and put it on top of a page so you can flip it up, like just a little cover to hide the journaling on a page. Pockets, it's good for a lot of little embellishments, tuck spots. So I like to have a little bit of vellum. And I also like to add some paper bag or some longer thing that you can fold out. I also do cardstock because if you're putting a lot of stuff on a page, cardstock holds, if you're putting a lot of pockets or belly bands or heavy stuff, pockets or cardstock holds way better than flimsy paper. So that's the way I get started. So I've decided to use 5 pages, which gives me really 10 pages. 5 sheets gives me 10 pages. And I'm going to look at the order. I've ripped the edges, I've inked them, and now I want to see the order of how they look next to each other. So let's see. I don't like that so much. Let's try this. Yeah, that. Here's my paper bag. Okay, this, so when the one that's in the center, you see the whole thing, and that's boring, all that white. So I'm going to switch that. There's my fold out. Okay, this I don't like, but I'll cover that up with something. And then there I have it. So that's called a signature. But before I start sewing this, there are at least 4 things that I like to do before I turn this all into a book. I like to do any sewing because it's way easier to sew on a single page than it is to try to put a whole book, a completed book, into your sewing machine. So if you want to sew anything directly onto the page, I'm not talking tabs or tags or anything, but if you want to do any big sewing of pockets or whatnot, I suggest you do that before you make your book. I also want to do any weird experiments. I want to think about tabs, and I want to make some connections between the pages. I do all that before I make my book, and I'll show you what I mean. These are 2 signatures I've been working on, and here I wanted a pocket, and so I sewed it in while this is not yet a book. So these are all just loose pages, just like I showed you. So you do your sewing. This one is cardstock. I didn't use any cardstock in that signature I just made, but I wanted something very sturdy to hold this belly band flap. So this page underneath is cardstock. So as you're making your signature, think about if you need any cardstock for construction purposes. And now here, I sewed in a belly band, and it's so easy to do because it's just a single page. I sewed in a belly band, and I also wanted to bring some of this pink over here. So we have some pink accents to go with the pink over here and the flowers and the flowers. So that brings those pages together a little bit. Prior to having this here, it was just like that. And then so that kind of brings those 2 pages together. So there's some creative thought going on before I've even gotten into the decorating part. I also want to do any weird experiments. Now this is drywall paste, drywall tape paste, something my husband had. And I was afraid it was going to wrinkle up the page, and I was also afraid that it was going to crumble and crust and all fall off, and it did none of those things. But if this had been a completed journal, I probably wouldn't have made that little experiment. So if it hadn't worked, you just get rid of this one page and you're none the worse. But it did work, so there. So that was a good experiment. Oh, tabs. So I have a terrible habit of, when I'm making a journal, I'll make the cover exactly this size. I'll make the cover exactly the size. And then if I put tabs in later, sometimes I don't want them to stick out. So I have to remember when I'm making the cover to make it big enough to cover those tabs if I want to. So if I'm thinking about making tabs and I want them to be covered, I'll often stick one in there just so when I go to make the cover, I know what I'm doing. Also, if you have a certain size cover that you're trying to make the journal for, think about that also. Maybe you need to make your pages all smaller to get your tabs to fit inside if that's what you want. So think about your tabs. And what else? Okay, here's another one where I made a connection. This was plain without this. This had a flower, and so I brought some flowers over here. and I sewed it in. So that's why I did that before the sewing. And here, just a little tip. I don't often like to see the sewing on the back of a pocket. I don't mind. I like to see it on the front of the pocket where it's doing good, and obviously that's why it's there. But when it's empty, I don't like to see it often, and so I'll often put pockets on both sides. So this stitching is holding in both pockets. That's just me being picky. So here's one that's not, here's one that's showing, but it's not doing anything because it's for a pocket over here. So sometimes I just try to cover that up. Not always. I'm not crazy. Just a little fussy. And then what else? Okay, here, again, I made a connection. Floral, floral. They kind of all go together. Before this was just plain. And so now I just have a nice base. No matter what I do, it just all kind of flows. And here's another way I like to hide sewing. This border here, that's on the back side of this sewn pocket, and you can't really even see the sewing because the border just hides it. So those are my ideas. Before I even sew anything together, I just get myself a good base like that. And I am going to finish up my the third signature that I just started. And in my next video, I'll show you how I put it all together. And then we'll have made a journal. Thanks for watching. Bye.